Om Ganana Tva Ganapatigam Vavamahe Kavim Namupavasravastramam Jeshtarajam Brahmanan Brahmanaspada Anushrunoti Bisi Dasadanam Om Mahaganadipataye Namaha Brahma Gurur Vishnum Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasme Sri Gurave Namaha Om Keshwaya Namaha Om Narayana Namaha Om Maha Om Govindaya Namaha, Om Vishnuvaya Namaha, Matsudaya Namaha, Trivikramaya Namaha, Vamanaya Namaha, Sridharaya Namaha, Hrishikeshaya Namaha, Padmanabhaya Namaha, Damodaraya Namaha, Sankarshnaya Namaha, Vasudevaya Namaha, Pradyumnaya Namaha, Niruddhaya Namaha, Purushottamaya Namaha, Dokshaya Namaha, Narasimhaya Namaha, Achyutaya Namaha, Janardhaya Namaha, Upendraya Namaha, Hare Namaha, Sri Krishnaya Namaha. Dear friends, we came to the 19th chapter of 10th canto of Mahabhagavata Purana. In this chapter, Lord Krishna saved the cows and cowherd boys. This chapter starts with the chapter, just a brief summary. One day, the cowherd boys became absorbed in sporting and allowed the cows to wander into the dense forest. Suddenly, a forest fire blazed up, and to escape its flames, the cows took refuge in a grove of sharp canes. When the cowherd boys missed their animals, they went searching for them, following their hoof prints and the trail of the blades of grass and other plants they had trampled or had broken with their teeth. Finally, the boys found the cows and removed them from the cane forest. But by the time the forest fire had grown strong and was threatening both the boys and the cows who were trapped in the fire. Thus the cowherd boys took shelter of Sri Krishna, the master of all mystic power, who told them to close their eyes. They did so, closed their eyes, and in a moment he had swallowed up the fierce forest fire, and brought them all back to Bandira tree mentioned in the last chapter. Seeing this wonderful display of mystic potency, the cowherd boys thought Krishna must be a god, and they began to praise him. Then they all returned home. This is the 19th chapter. It starts with the Shuka Uvacha. Kridasakteshu Gopeshu Tadgavo Duracharinihi Sunaicharanto Vimushuspranaobena Gupharam. Shuka Maharshi is telling, while the cowherd boys were completely absorbed in playing, their cows wandered far away in the deep of the forest. They hungered for more grass, and with no one to watch them, they entered dense forest. Passing from one part of the great forest to another, the goats, cows, and buffalo eventually entered the area overgrown with sharp canes. The heat of a nearby forest fire made them thirsty, and they cried out in distress. Not seeing the cows before them, Krishna, Balarama, and their cowherd friends suddenly felt repentant for having neglected them. The boys searched all around but could not discover where they had gone. Then the boys began tracing out the cows' path by noticing their hoof prints and the blades of the grass the cows had broken with their hoofs and the teeth. All the cowherd boys were in a great anxiety because they thought they had lost their source of livelihood, the cows. Within the Munja forest, the cowherd boys finally found their valuable cows who had lost their way and were crying. Then the boys, thirsty and tired, herded the cows onto the path back home. The Supreme Personality of Godhead called out to the animals in a voice that resounded like a rumbling cloud. Hearing the sound of their names, the cows were overjoyed and called out to the Lord in reply. Suddenly, a great forest fire appeared on all sides, threatening to destroy all the forest creatures. Like a chariot driver, the wind swept the fire onward, and terrible sparks shot in all directions. Indeed, the great fire extended its tongues of flame toward all moving and non-moving creatures. Just as Krishna and Balarama and the cowherd boys were about to take their cows back home, the forest fire previously mentioned raged out of control and surrounded all of them. As the cows and cowherd boys started at the forest fire, attacking them on all sides, they became fearful. The boys then approached Krishna and Balarama for shelter, just as those who were disturbed by fear of death approaching the Supreme Personal Godhead. Then now the boys addressed them as follows. They were shouting, Krishna, Krishna, Mahavira, hey Ramuda, please protect us from the fire. The cowherd boy said, O Krishna, most powerful one, O Rama, Balarama, you whose prowess never fails. Please save your devotees who are about to be burned by this forest fire and have come to take shelter of you. Krishna, certainly your friends should not be destroyed. O knower of the nature of all the things, we have accepted you as our Lord, and we are souls surrendered unto you. So Shukamaster continued, hearing these pitiful words from his friends, the Lord Krishna told them, just close your eyes and do not be afraid. This verse clearly reveals the simple, sublime relationship between the Lord Krishna and his pure devotees. The absolute truth, this verse clearly reveals the simple, sublime relationship between Krishna and his pure devotees. The absolute truth, the Supreme Almighty Lord, is actually a young, blissful, cowherd boy named Krishna. God is youthful and his mentality is playful. When he saw that his beloved friends were terrified of the forest fire, he simply told them to close their eyes and not be afraid. Then Lord Krishna acted as described in the next verse. All right, the boys replied and immediately closed their eyes. Then the Supreme Lord, the master of all mystic power, opened his mouth and swallowed the terrible fire, saving his friends from danger. The cowherd boys were suffering from extreme fatigue, hunger, thirsty, and were about to be consumed by horrible forest fire. All this is indicated here by the word. All this indicated here by the word Krishna. Krishna. The cowherd boys opened their eyes and were amazed to find not only that the cows had been saved from the terrible fire, but that they had all been brought back to the Bandira tree. When the cowherd boys saw that they had been saved from the forest fire by the Lord's mystic power, which is manifested by his internal potency, they began to think that Krishna must be a demigod. Krishna must be a god. The cowherd boys of Vrindavana simply loved Krishna as their only friend and exclusive object of devotion. To increase their ecstasy, Krishna displayed to them cowherd boys could never give up their ecstatic loving friendship with Krishna. The cowherd boys of Vrindavana simply loved Krishna as their only friend and exclusive object of devotion. To increase their ecstasy, Krishna displayed them his mystic potency. Krishna displayed his potency and saved them from terrible forest fire. The cowherd boys could never give up their ecstatic love friendship with Krishna. Therefore, rather than considering Krishna to be God after they saw his extraordinary power, the extraordinary power what Krishna has got, they thought that perhaps he was a God. But since Lord Krishna was their beloved friend, they were on the same level with him, and thus They thought that they too must be demigods. In this way, Krishna consciousness since Lord Krishna was their beloved friend, they were on the same level with him, and thus they thought that they too must be a god. In this, Krishna's cover brands became overwhelmed with ecstasy. गासनिवर्त्य साहेन सहारावो जनार्दनः वेणुं विरणयोन्गोष्ठ मगार्दुष्वैरभत्पृष्ठतः. It was now late in the afternoon, and Lord Krishna, accompanied by Balarama, turned the cows back toward home. Playing his flute in a special way, Krishna returned to the cowherd village in the company of his cowherd boys, friends, who chanted his glories. Gopinam Paramananda Asit Govinda Darshane Kshanam Yugatatamiva Yosam Yena Vina Bhavatu. The young gopis took the greatest pleasure in seeing Govinda come home, since for them even a moment without his association seemed like 100 ages. After seeing the cowherd boys from the blazing forest fire, Krishna saved the cowherd girls and boys from the blazing fire of separation from him. The gopis headed by Srimati Radharani have the greatest love for Krishna, and even a single moment of separation from him seems like millions of years to them. The gopis are the greatest devotees of the god Krishna, and their specific pastimes with Krishna will be described later in this work. Thus ends the purports of humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to the 10th canto, 19th chapter of the Srimad Mahabhagavatam, entitled Swallowing the Forest Fire. That chapter is Swallowing the Forest Fire is finished. The next chapter is 20th, the rainy season and autumn in Vrindavana. The description of the Vrindavana in that rainy season and also in autumn. To enhance the description of Lord Krishna's pastimes, Sri Shuka Maharishi describes in this chapter the beauty of Vrindavana during autumn and rainy season. In the course of his presentation, he gives various charming instructions in metaphorical terms. Shukavacha Tayostadbutam karma davagnermokshanatmanah gopastribhyam samachalam samachakyum pralambamedavacha. Shuka Maharshi said, the ladies of Vrindavana, the cowherd boys, then related in full detail Krishna and Balarama's wonderful activities of delivering them from the forest fire and killing the demon Prahalada. Gopavradascha gopascha talpakarna vismita munire deva pravare Krishna Ramo vrajangata Krishna Ramo vrajangatau. The elder cowherd men and ladies were amazed to hear this account, and they concluded that Krishna and Balaram must be exalted gods who had appeared in Vrindavana. Tata pravartata pravait sarvatattva samadbhava vidyotamana paridhirvi surjitanavastala. This is the third shloka of the 20th chapter of description of rainy seasons, and then the rainy season began, giving life and sustenance to all living beings in the plants kingdom. The sky began to rumble with thunder, and lightning flashed on the horizon. The sky was then covered by dense blue clouds accompanied by lightning and thunder. Thus, the sky and its natural illumination were covered by the same way that the spirit soul is covered by the three modes of material nature. Lightning is compared to the mode of goodness, thunder to the mode of passion, and clouds to the mode of ignorance. Thus, the cloudy sky at the onset of the rainy season is analogous to the pure spirit soul when he becomes disturbed by the modes of nature. For at that time, he is covered and his original brilliant nature is only dimly reflected through the haze of the material qualities. With its rays, the sun had for 8 months drunk up the earth's wealth in the form of water. Now that the proper time had arrived, the sun began releasing this accumulated wealth of water in his area as a rain form. The Acharyas compare the sun's evaporating the earth's wealth of water to a king's collecting taxes. In chapter 20 of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada explains this analogy as follows. Clouds are accumulated water drawn up from the fan by the sunshine. Continually for 8 months, the sun evaporates all kinds of water from the surface of the globe. And this water is accumulated in the shape of the clouds, which are distributed as water when there is need. Similarly, a government exacts various taxes from the citizens, such as income tax and sales tax, which the citizens are able to pay by their different material activities, agriculture, trade, industry, and so on. Flashing with lightning, great clouds were shaken and swept about by fierce winds. Just like merciful persons, the clouds give their lives for the pleasure of this world. Just as great, compassionate personalities sometimes give their lives for the wealth of happiness of the society. The rain clouds pour down their rain upon the poor earth. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada comments as follows in this verse. During the rainy season, there are strong winds blustering all over the country and carrying clouds from one place to another to distribute water. When there is urgently needed after so much heated months, when the water is urgently needed after the summer season, the clouds are just like a rich man who in times of need distributes his mercy even by exhausting his whole treasury. So the clouds exhaust themselves by distributing water all the time. Maharaja Dasharatha, the father of the Lord Ramachandra, used to fight with his enemies. It was said that he approached them just like a farmer approaching when Maharaja Dasharatha, the father of Lord Rama, used to fight with his enemies, it was said that he approached them just like a farmer approaching unnecessary plants and trees. When there was need of giving charity, he used to distribute money exactly as the cloud distributes the rain. The distribution of rain by clouds is so symptoms. The earth had been emaciated by the summer heat, but she became fully nourished again when moistened by the good God of rain. Thus the earth has life. The earth had been emaciated by the summer heat, but she became fully nourished again when moistened by the god of rain. Thus, the earth was like a person whose body has been emaciated by austerities, undergone for a material purpose, but who again becomes fully nourished when he achieves the fruit of those austerities. We are coming to the eighth shloka. In the evening, twilight, during the rainy season, the darkness allowed the glowworms, but not the stars to shine forth. Just as in the age of Kali, the predomination of sinful activities allows atheistic doctrines to overshadow the true knowledge of the Vedas. Srila Prabhupada comments as follows. During the rainy season, in the evening, there are many glowworms visible about the top of the trees. Hither and there, thither, they glitter just like lights. But the luminaries of the sky, the stars, and the moon, not visible. Particularly in the age of Kali, persons who are atheists or miscreants become very prominently visible, whereas persons who are actually following the Vedic principles for spiritual emancipation are practically obscure. This age, during this age, Kali Yuga is compared to the cloudy season of the living entities. In this age, real knowledge is covered by the influence of the material advancement of civilization. The cheap mental speculators, atheists, and manufacturers of so-called religious principles become prominent like the glowworm. People should learn to take advantage of the actual luminaries of the sky, the sun, moon, and the stars, instead of the glowworm's light. Actually, the glowworms cannot give any light in the darkness of the night. As clouds sometimes clear, even in a rainy season, and the moon, stars, sun become visible. So even in this Kali Yuga, there are sometimes advantages. The Vedic movement of Lord Chaitanya, the distribution of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra is understood in the same manner. People seriously anxious to find real life should take advantage of this movement instead of looking far toward the so-called light of mental speculators and atheists. The frogs, who had all along been lying silent, suddenly began croaking when they heard the rumbling of the rain clouds in the same way that Brahmana students who perform their morning duties in silence, they come and go. This is the situation in the Vrindavana in the rainy season, early part of the rainy season. With the heat in the summer, the whole area is heated up, and when the rain starts, it started cooling down. With the advent of the rainy season, the insignificant streams which had become dry began to swell and then strayed from their proper courses, like the body, property, and money of a man controlled by the urges of his sense. During the rainy season, many small ponds, lakes, rivulets become filled with water. Otherwise, the rest of the year, they remain dry. The newly grown grass made the earth emerald green. The Indragopa insects added a reddish hue, and white mushrooms added further color and circles of shade. Thus, the earth appeared like a person who has suddenly become rich. Srila Sridhara Swami comments that the word Ranam indicates men of the royal order. Thus, the colorful display of dark green fields decorated with bright red insects and white mushrooms and umbrellas can be compared to the royal parade displaying the military strength of a king. With their wealth of grains, the fields gave joy to the farmers. but those fields created remorse in the hearts of those who were too proud to engage in farming and who failed to understand who everything is under the control of the sunrise. The farmers' wealth of the grains in the fields gave joy to the farmers, but those fields created remorse in the hearts of those who were too proud to engage in farming and who failed to understand how everything is under the control of the Supreme. It is common for people living in the large cities to become miserable and disgusted when there is ample rainfall. They do not understand or forgotten that the rain is nourishing the crops they will eat. Modern sophisticated people often look down their noses at those engaged in agricultural work. In fact, American slang, a simple, unintelligent person is sometimes called a farmer. There are also government agencies as all creatures of the land and water took advantage of the newly fallen rainwater, their forms became attractive and pleasing, just as devotee becomes beautiful by engaging in the service of the Supreme Lord. Where the rivers joined the ocean, it becomes agitated, its waves blown about by the wind, just as the mind of an immature yogi becomes agitated because he is still tainted by the lust and attached to the objects of sense gratification. Just as devotees whose minds are absorbed in the personality of Godhead remain peaceful even when attacked by all sorts of dangers, the mountains in the rainy season were not at all disturbed. When splashed by torrents of rain, the mountains are not shaken. Rather, they are cleansed of the dirt and became resplendent and beautiful. Similarly, an advanced devotee of Supreme Lord is not shaken from his devotional program by disturbing the conditions, which instead cleans his heart of the dust of attachment to this world. Lord Krishna, realizing that all suffering is due to the sufferer's own previous mistakes, Marga Vaibhavam, text 16, Marga Babuva Sandigda Straneshwanyaham Samskruta Nabhyasya Manaha Sutayo Dvijay Kalahata Ivaha Kalina Chahata Vijay Kalahata Ivaha. During the rainy season, the roads not being cleaned became all covered with grass and debris and were thus different to make it out. Those roads were like religious scriptures that Brahmanas no longer study, and that has become compacted. The roads were like religious scriptures that Brahmanas no longer study, and that thus become corrupted and cover over the passage of time. Though the clouds are the well-wishing friends of all living beings, the lightning are fickle in its affinities, moved from one group of clouds to another, like lusty women, unfaithful even to virtuous men. Srila Prabhupada comments, during the rainy season, lightning appears in one group of clouds and then immediately in another group of clouds. This phenomena is compared to a lusty woman who does not fix her mind on one man. A cloud is compared to a qualified person because it pours rain and gives sustenance to the many people. A man who is qualified similarly gives sustenance to many living creatures, such as family members or many workers in the business Unfortunately, his whole life can be disturbed by a wife who divorces him when the husband is disturbed. The whole family is ruined. The children are dispersed. Children are dispersed or the business is closed and everything is affected. It is therefore recommended that a woman desiring to advance in Krishna consciousness peacefully live with a husband and that the couple not separate under any condition. The husband and wife should control sex intelligence and concentrate their minds on Krishna consciousness so their life may be successful. After all, in the material world, a man requires a woman and a woman requires a man. When they are combined, they should live peacefully in Krishna consciousness, in Bhakti Marga and Bhakti Yoga. Follow the Bhakti Marga, follow the devotional activities on praying Lord Krishna, and that's how peacefully they can live and should not be restless like the lightning flashing from one group of clouds to another. When the Karur bow of Indra, the rainbow, appeared in the sky, which had the quality of thundering sound, it was unlike ordinary bows because it did not rest upon a string. Similarly, when the Supreme Lord appears in this world, which is the interaction of the material qualities, he is unlike ordinary persons because he remains free from all material qualities and independent of all material conditions. The sloka 19, Nararajoda Paschannaha Swajitsarajitairganai Aham Matya Basitaya Swabaso Purusho Yata. During the rainy season, the moon was prevented from appearing directly by the covering of the clouds coming in front of the moon. Clouds will cover the moon, which were themselves illumined by the moon's rays. Similarly, the living being in material existence is prevented from appearing directly by the covering of a false ego, which is itself illumined by the consciousness of the pure soul. The analogy given here is excellent. During the rainy season, we cannot see the moon in the sky sometimes because the moon is covered by the clouds. These clouds, however, are radiant with the glow of the moon's sound rays. Similarly, in conditioned time, similarly in our conditioned material existence, similarly in our conditioned mental existence, we cannot directly perceive the soul because of our consciousness is covered by a false ego, which is the false identification with the material world and the material body. And it is the soul's own consciousness that illumines the false ego. So the false ego is compared to the clouds. When the false ego goes away, when the cloud moves away, then you can see the moon rays. And it is the soul's own consciousness that illumines the false ego. As the Gita describes, the energy of the soul is consciousness. So, energy of the soul is consciousness. And when this consciousness manifests through the screen of false ego, it appears as dull material consciousness, in which there is no direct vision of the soul or God. In the material world, even great philosophers ultimately resort to hazy ambiguities when speaking about the absolute truth, just as the cloudy sky manifests only in a dull and indirect way the iridescent light of the moon. In material life, our false ego is often enthusiastic, hopeful, and apparently aware of various material affairs. And such consciousness encourages us to push on in the material existence. But in truth, we are merely experiencing the dull reflection of our original, pure consciousness, which is Krishna consciousness, direct perception of the soul and God. Sorry for the disturbance. I just refuse to take the call. Sorry about that. This is comparable to thinking that the luminous clouds are lighting up the night sky, while in fact it is the moonshine that illumines the sky, and the clouds that merely dull and hamper the moonshine. The clouds appear luminous because they are filtering and impeding the brilliant rays of the moon. Similarly, at times, material consciousness appears pleasurable or enlightened because it is screening or filtering the original blissful and enlightened consciousness coming directly from the soul. If we can understand the ingenious analogy given in this universe, we can easily advance in Krishna consciousness. So we are in the 20th of shloka now. Megagamotsava Hrushva Pratyanandana Shikandinaha Griheshu Tapta Nirvinna Yatachyuta Janagame. Yatachyuta Janagame. The peacocks became festive and cried out a joyful greeting when they saw the clouds arrive. Just as people distressed in household life feel pleasure when the pure devotees of the infallible Supreme Lord visit them. After dry summer season, the peacock becomes jubilant with the arrival of the first thundering rain clouds, and thus they dance in great happiness. Srila Prabhupada comments, we have practical experience that many of our students were dry and morose previous to their coming to Krishna consciousness, but having come in contact with the devotees, they are now dancing like a jubilant peacock. We are coming in the shloka 21. Pitvapaha padapaha padvirasanmanartha murtayaha prakshamastapasa shranta yata kamanuseveya. The trees had grown thin and dry, but after they drank the newly fallen rainwater through their feet, their various bodily features blossomed. Similarly, one whose body has grown thin and weak from austerity again exhibits his healthy bodily features upon enjoying the material objects gained through that austerity. The word pada means foot, pa means drinking. Trees are called padapa because they drink through their roots, which are likened to feet. Upon drinking the newly fallen rainwater, the trees in Vrindavana began to manifest. For example, politicians in America undergo grueling austerities while traveling about the countryside camping for election. Businessmen also will often deny personal comfort to make their business successful. Such austerity persons, upon acquiring the fruits of their austerity, again become healthy and satisfied like trees eagerly drinking rainwater from enduring the austerity of a dry hot summer. The cranes continued dwelling on the shores of the lakes, although the shores were agitated during the rainy season, just as materialistic persons with contaminated minds always remain at home despite the many disturbances there. During the rainy season, there are often mudslides around the shores of lakes and thorny bushes and hushes and stones and other debris sometimes accumulate there. Despite all these inconveniences, ducks and cranes continue when Indra sent forth his rains, the flood waters broke through the irrigation dikes in the agricultural fields, just as in the Kali Yuga, the atheist false theories break down the boundaries of Vedic injunction. The clouds, impelled by the winds, release their nectarian water for the benefit of all living beings, just as kings instructed by their Brahmana priests dispense charity to the citizens. Srila Prabhupada comments, in the rainy season, the clouds tossed by the wind deliver water that is welcomed like nectar. When the Vedic followers, the Brahmanas, inspire rich men like kings and wealthy mercantile community to give charity in the performance of great sacrifices. The distribution of such wealth is also nectarian. The four sections of the human distribution of such wealth is also nectarian. The four sections of the human society, named Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras, are meant to live peacefully in cooperative mode. This is possible when they are guided by expert. But when they are not guided by the expert, this sort of thing can happen. Vedic Brahmanas who perform sacrifices and distribute wealth equally. When the Vrindavana forest had thus become resplendent, filled with water, when the Vrindavana forest had thus become resplendent, filled with ripe dates, jambu fruits, Lord Krishna, surrounded by his cows and covered boyfriends, accompanied by Sri Balarama, entered that forest to enjoy eating the fruits. The cows had moved slowly because of their weighty milky backs, but they quickly ran to the Supreme Personality Godhead as soon as he called them, their affection for him causing their udders to become wet. Srila Prabhupada comments, the cows being fed by new grasses became very healthy and their milk bags were all very full. When Lord Krishna called them by name, they immediately came to him out of affection, and in their joyful condition, the milk flowed from their bags. The Lord saw the joyful aborigine girls of the forest, the trees dripping sweet sap, and the mountain waterfalls whose resounding indicated when it rained, the Lord would sometimes enter a cave or the hollow of a tree to play and to eat roots and fruits. Sanatana Goswami explains that during the rainy season, bulbs and roots are very tender and palatable. Lord Krishna would eat them along with the wild fruits found in the forest. Lord Krishna and his young boyfriends would sit in the hollow of a tree or within a cave and enjoy pastimes while waiting for the rain to stop. The Lord Krishna would take his meal of boiled rice and yogurt sent from home in the company of Lord Shankarshana and the cowherd boys who regularly ate with him. They would all sit down to eat on Lord's stone near the water, like a picnic. Lord Krishna watched the contented bulls, calves, and cows sitting on the green grass and grazing with the closed eyes. He saw that cows were tired from the burden of their heavy milk bag. The lushy beauty of the rainy season in Vrindavana meet enhanced the pleasure of pastimes of Lord Krishna. Thus, to set the scene for the Lord's loving affairs, his internal potency make all the arrangements described in this chapter. When Lord Rama and Lord Keshava were those dwelling in Vrindavana, Lord Rama is Balarama here. Balarama and Lord Krishna were thus dwelling in Vrindavana. The fall season arrived. When the sky is cloudless, the water is clear and the wind is gentle. Text 33, Sharada Nirajotpatya Nirani Pratyam Yayuhu Prishtanami Machetamsi Punar Yoga Niveshaya. Autumn season, which is regenerated the lotus flowers, also restored the various bodies of water to their original purity, just as the process of devotional service purifies the minds of the fallen yogis when they return to it. Autumn, clear the sky of clouds. Let the animals get out their crowded living conditions, clean the earth of its covering of mud, and purify the water of contamination in the same way that loving service is rendered to Lord Krishna, frees the members of the four spiritual orders from their respective troubles. Every human being must perform the prescribed duties corresponding to one of the four spiritual orders of life. These divisions are: one, celebrate the student life, brahmacharya. Celebrate student life is brahmacharya. Married life is grihastha. Retired life is vanaprastha. And renounced life is sannyasa. A brahmachari must perform many menial duties during the student life. But as he becomes advanced in loving service to Lord Krishna, his superiors recognize his spiritual status and evaluate him to higher duties. The innumerable obligations performed on behalf of the wife and children constantly harass a householder. But as he becomes advanced in loving service to Krishna, God, he is automatically elevated by the laws of nature to the more enjoyable spiritual occupations, and he somehow minimizes material duties. Those in the vanaprastha or retired under order of life also perform many duties, and these can also be replaced by ecstatic loving service to Lord Krishna. Similarly, renounced life has many natural difficulties, not the least which is that sannyasis or renounced men are inclined to meditate on the impersonal aspect of Lord Krishna. Similarly, renounced life has many natural difficulties, not the least of which is that sannyasis or renounced men are inclined to meditate on the impersonal aspect of the absolute truth. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Klesho Diktaras Tesham Avyakto Chetasam, for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifested impersonal feature of the Lord, advancement is exceedingly painful. But as soon as sannyasi takes to preaching the glories of Krishna in every town and village, his life becomes blissful sequence of beautiful realization. In the autumn season, the sky returns to its natural blue color. The vanishing of the clouds is like the vanishing of troublesome duty. We came to the sloka 35. The clouds, having given up all they possessed, shone forth with purified effulgency, just like a peaceful sages who given up all material desires and are thus free of all sinful propensities. When the clouds are filled with water, they are dark, cover the sun's rays, just as the material mind of an impure man covers the soul shining within. But when the clouds pour down their rain, they become white and then brilliantly reflect the shining sun, just as a man who gives up all material desire and giving when the clouds pour down their rain, they become white and they brilliantly reflect the shining sun. Just as a man gives up all material desires and sinful propensities, becomes purified, and then brilliantly reflects his own soul and supreme soul within. During this season, the mountains sometimes released their pure water and sometimes did not, just as experts in transcendental science. The first part of this chapter describes the rainy season, and the second part has been dealing with the autumn season, which begins with the rain stops. During the rainy season, water always flows from the mountains, but during the autumn, the water sometimes flows and sometimes does not. Similarly, great saintly teachers sometimes speak expansively on spiritual knowledge, and sometimes they are silent. The self realized soul is closely in touch with the Supreme Soul, Lord Krishna. and according to his desires, a competent spiritual scientist may or may not describe the absolute truth depending on the specific conditions and circumstances. We came to the shloka 37. Naivavidam kshiyamanam jalam gandha jalechara yatayaranvaham kshayam nara muda kutumbinaha. The fish swimming in the increasingly shallow water did not at all understood that the water was diminishing, just as a foolish family man cannot see how the time they have left to live in this is diminishing with every passing day. After the rainy season, the water gradually goes down, but stupid fish do not understand. Thus, this understand the consequence of this, that, this, and that. We say we have to. Similarly, those infatuated with family life do not understand that the remainder of their life is constantly decreasing. Thus, they fail to perfect their Krishna consciousness and are stranded in the cycle of birth and death. It's a caution for all the devotees that as we grow older, we are coming closer to our end of life. Before we are ending our life, we should complete our Bhakti Marga, Bhakti Yoga, and devotional activities, reading Bhagavatam, reading Bhagavad Gita. All this has to be finished before ending the end point of your life. This is the way Bhakti Marga and Bhakti Yoga and devotional activities will help you to do this. So you start early, as soon as possible, you start your Bhakti Marga as soon as possible, and devotional work on Lord Krishna. Start doing that. Just as miserly poverty-stricken person overly absorbed in family life suffers because he cannot control his senses, the fish swimming in the shallow water had to suffer the heat of the autumn light. Just as miserly poverty-stricken person overly absorbed in family life suffers because he cannot control his senses, the fish swimming in the shallow water had to suffer the heat of the autumn sun. Although, as described in the previous verse, unintelligent fish are not aware of the diminishing water. One may think these fish are still happy according to the old proverb, ignorance is a bliss. But when the ignorant fish are scorched by the autumn sun, similarly, although an attached family man may consider his ignorance of spiritual life is blissful, he is constantly disturbed by the problems of family life, and indeed his uncontrolled senses. Similarly, although an attached family man may consider his ignorance of spiritual life blissful, he is constantly disturbed by the problems of family life, and indeed his uncontrolled senses lead him into a situation of unrelieved anguish. Gradually, the different areas of land give up their muddy condition and the plants grow past their unripe stage. In the same way that sober sages give up egotism and passiveness. These are based on things different from the real self, namely the imperial. These are based on the things different from the real self, namely the material body and its byproducts. The word adishu in this verse indicates the byproducts of the body, such as children, home, and wealth. With the arrival of autumn, the ocean and the lakes became silent, their water still, just like a sage who has desisted from all material activities and given up his recitation of Vedic mantras also. One recites ordinary Vedic mantras for material promotion, mystic power, and impersonal salvation. But when sage is completely free of personal desire, he vibrates the transcendental glories of the Supreme Lord exclusively. We are coming to the 41th sloka. Kedarebhyastapo grihnarashtaka dhrudasetubi yatha pranai suvajjana tannirodena yoginaha. He is comparing yogi for something else. In the same way that the practitioners of yoga bring their senses under strict control to check their consciousness from flowing out through the agitated senses. The farmers erected strong mud banks to keep the water within their rice fields from draining out. Sri Prabhupada comments, in autumn, farmers save the water within the fields by building a strong wall so that the water contained within the field cannot run out. There is hardly any hope for rainfall. Therefore, they want to save whatever is in the field. Similarly, a person who is actually advanced in the self-realization protects his energy by controlling the senses. It's advised that after the age of 50, one should retire from family life and conserve the energy of the body for utilization in the advancement of Krishna consciousness. Unless one is able to control the senses and engage them in the transcendental loving service of Mukunda, there is no possibility of salvation. Because after the age of 50, the time left for the remaining part of the life, if we don't do it, if we don't start the Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Marga, and Bhakti devotional activities in remembrance of Lord Krishna, join the Krishna consciousness group, unless one is able to control the senses and engage them in the transcendental loving service of Lord Krishna, there is no possibility of salvation. The autumn moon relieved all creatures of the suffering caused by the sun's rays. Just as wisdom relieves a person of the misery caused by his identifying with his material body. And as Lord Mukunda relieves Vrindavana's ladies of the distress caused by their separation from him. Free of clouds and filled with clearly visible stars, the autumn sky shone brilliantly, just like the spiritual consciousness of one who has directly experienced the purport of the Vedic scriptures. Spiritual consciousness of one who has directly experienced the purport of the Vedic scriptures. The clear and starry autumn sky can also be compared to the pure heart of the devotee. The spiritual nature is always brilliant, clean and blissful, and this spiritual nature, called Vaikuntha, immediately satisfies all the desires of the soul. This is the secret of Krishna consciousness. The full moon shone in the sky, surrounded by stars, just as Sri Krishna, the Lord of Yadu dynasty, shone brilliantly on the earth, surrounded by all the Vrishnis. Srila Sanatana Goswami explains that in Vrindavana, the full moon is eternally risen, and this full moon is like the full manifestation of the absolute truth of Sri Krishna. When he was manifest on the earth, Lord Krishna was surrounded by prominent members of the Vrishni dynasty such as Nanda, Upananda, Vasudeva, and Akrura. They are all Vrishi dynasty's people. Except for the gopis, whose hearts had fallen stolen by Krishna, the people could forget their suffering by embracing the wind coming from the flower-filled forest. This wind was neither hot nor cold. Shloka 46. Gavo mruga kaga narya pushtinya sharada bhavan anniyamana surishte paileri shikriya ivaha. By the influence of the autumn season, all the cows, doe, woman, and female birds became fertile and were followed by their respective mates in search of sexual enjoyment. Just as activities performed for the service of the Supreme Lord are automatically followed by all beneficial results. Prabhupada comments on the arrival of the autumn season, all the cows, deer, birds, and females in general become pregnant, because in that season, generally all the husbands become impelled by sex desire. This is exactly like the transcendentalists who, by the grace of the Supreme Lord, are bestowed with the benediction of their destination of life. Srila Rupa Goswami has instructed in his Upadeshamrita that one should perform devotional service with great enthusiasm, patience, and conviction, and should follow the rules and regulations, keep oneself clean from material contamination, and stay in the association of devotees. By following these principles, one is sure to achieve the desired results of a devotional service, and one should perform devotional service with a great enthusiasm, patience, and conviction, and should follow the rules and regulations, keep oneself clean from material contamination, and stay in the association of devotees. By following these principles, one is sure to achieve the desired result of devotional service. For he who patiently follows the regulative principles of devotional service, the time will come when he will achieve the result, as the wives reap results by becoming pregnant. Srila Rupa Goswami has instructed in his Upadeshamrita that one should perform devotional service with great enthusiasm. All the devotees should perform devotional service with great enthusiasm, patience, and conviction, and should follow the rules and regulations, keep oneself clean from material contamination, stay in association of devotees. This is important. Keep oneself clean from material contamination and do follow the rules and regulations. Those who are doing a Gayatri Upasana, who had a Upanayana ceremony, they should chant Gayatri Mantra 108 times in the morning, just before the sunrise, and again before the sunset, again 108 times. These are the rules and regulations of Brahmacharya or Grahasthashrama. Both who are Grahasthas, both who are Brahmachari, after the Upanayana, they have to do Gayatri chanting 108 times twice a day. Keep oneself clean from material contamination. You have to take a bath early in the morning, then do the prayers, and then with association of other devotees, start your devotional activities of Lord Krishna. By following these principles, one is sure to achieve the desired result of devotional service. For he who patiently follows the regulative principles of devotional service, the time will come when he will achieve the result. Similarly, the wives reap results by becoming pregnant. The devotional service of the devotees will give regulative principles. They achieve the result of attaining higher stages of moksha, higher stages of bhakti marga, and reaching the moksha. O King Parikshit, when the autumn sun rose, all the lotus flowers blossomed happily, except the night blooming kumut. Just as in the presence of a strong ruler, everyone becomes fearless, except the thieves. Shloka number 48. Puragrameஷ்டாग्ரயணேரேந்திரியைஸ்தேமோத்சவை बभूव पक्वसत्याद्य कलाभ्यां नितराम हरे. In all the towns and villages, people held great festivals, performing the Vedic fire sacrifice for honoring and tasting the first grains of the new harvest, along with the similar celebrations. Vedic fire sacrifice is doing yajna or homa, havana. This is called performing the Vedic fire sacrifice, is havana. In the havan, you are doing havana samigri or rice or swistikrit or a sweet pongal or modaka for Ganapati. These are all sacrifice. You are honoring and tasting the first grains of the new harvest, along with the similar celebrations that followed local custom and tradition. Thus, the earth rich with newly grown grain and especially beautified by the presence of Krishna and Balarama, shown beautifully as an expansion of the Supreme Lord. The word agranyaya refers to a particular authorized Vedic sacrifice, and the word indriyai refers to folk ceremonies that have somewhat worldly objectives. Srila Prabhupada comments as follows: during autumn, the fields become filled with ripened grains. At that time, the people become happy over the harvest and observe various ceremonies, such as Navanna, the offering of new grains to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The new grains are first offered to the deities in various temples, and all are invited to take sweet rice made with these new grains. There are other religious ceremonies and methods of worship, particularly in Bengal, where the greatest of all such ceremonies is called Durga Puja in Bengal. The last shloka, 49th shloka of this chapter 20th, Vaning Manikrisha Prasnata Nirgam Marta Nupendere Varsharuddha Yata Siddha Sopindhan Kala Agate. The merchants, sages, kings, and brahmachari students kept in by the rain were at last free to go out and attain their desired objects, just as those who achieve perfection in this life can, when the proper time comes, leave the material body, attain their respective forms. Srila Prabhupada comments, in Vrindavana, the autumn season was very beautiful. Then, because of the presence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna and Balarama, the mercantile community, the royal order, and the great sages were free to move to achieve their desired benedictions. Similarly, the transcendentalist, when freed from the engagement of the material body, also achieved their desired goal. During the rainy season, the mercantile community cannot move from one place to another easily, and so do not get their desired profit. Nor can the royal order go from one place to another to collect taxes from the people. As for saintly persons who must travel to preach transcendental knowledge, they also are restrained by the rainy season. But during the autumn, all of them leave their confines. In the case of the transcendentalist, be he jnani or yogi or a devotee, because of the material body, he cannot actually enjoy spiritual achievement. But as soon as he gives up the body after death, the jnani merges into the spiritual effulgency of the Lord Supreme, Lord Krishna. The yogi transfers himself to the various higher planets, and the devotee the yogi transfers himself to the various higher planets, and the devotee goes to the planet of the Supreme Lord Krishna's Goloka Vrindavana or the Vaikunthas, and thus enjoys this eternal spiritual life in Krishna Goloka. Thus, and the purpose of the humble servants of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the 10th canto, 20th chapter of the Srimad Mahabhagavatam, entitled Rainy Season and Autumns in Vrindavana. The next chapter is 21st. The gopis glorify the song of Krishna's flute. This chapter describes how Lord Sri Krishna entered the enchanting forest of Vrindavana upon the arrival of the autumn, and praises the young cowherd girls sang when they heard the vibration of his flute. As Lord Krishna, Lord Balarama, and their cowherd friends entered the forest to graze the cows, Krishna began playing his flute. The gopis heard the enchanting flute song and understood that Krishna was entering the forest. Then they narrated to each other the Lord's various activities. The gopis declared to see Lord Krishna playing his flute while taking the cows to pasture, his highest perfection for the eyes. What pious activities has this flute performed that enable him to freely drink the nectar of the Sri Krishna's lips, a blessing we cowherd girls find difficult to achieve. Hearing the songs of Krishna's flute, the peacocks also start dancing, and all the other creatures became stunned when they see them. The gods traveled through the sky in their airplanes, were vexed by Cupid, and their garments became loose. The ears of the cows stand on, and as they drink the nectar of this flute song, and their calves simply stand stunned. The milk they have been drinking from their mother's udders still in their mouths. The birds take shelter of the branches of the trees and close their eyes, listening to the song of Krishna's flute with rapt attention. The following rivers became perturbed. The flowing of the rivers became perturbed by conjugal attraction for Krishna, and stopping their flow, embrace Krishna's lotus feet with the arms of their waves, while the clouds serve as a parasols to shade Krishna's head from the hot sun. The Aborigine woman of the Sabara race, seeing the grass stained by the red kumkum, adoring the Lord's lotus feet, smear this vermilion powder upon their breast and faces to alleviate the distress created by the Cupid. Govardhana Hill offers grass and various kinds of fruits and bulbous roots in worship of the Lord Sri Krishna. All the non-moving living beings take on the characteristics of moving creatures, and the moving living beings become stationary. These things are all very wonderful. The chapter starts with the Shukavacha. Ittam sharat sachachalam padmakar sugandhina namishrutyayana vatam sago gopala kochuta. Thus the Vrindavana forest was filled with the transparent autumn waters and cooled by breezes perfumed with the fragrance of lotus flowers growing in the clear lakes. The infallible Lord, accompanied by his cows and covered boyfriends, entered that Vrindavana forest. Lord Krishna, with covered boys, came to the lake. The lakes, rivers, and hills of Vrindavana resounded with sounds of maddened bees and flocks of birds moving about the flowering trees. In the company of the covered boys and Balarama, Madhupati Sri Krishna entered that forest, and while herding the cows, he began to vibrate his flute. As suggested by the words Chukja Venam, Lord Krishna skillfully blended the sound of his flute with lovely sounds of Vrindavana's multicolored birds. Thus, an irresistible heavenly vibration was created. When the young ladies in the covered village of Vraja heard the song of Krishna's flute, which arouses the influence of Cupid, some of them privately began describing Krishna's qualities to their intimate friends. The covered girls began to speak about Krishna, but when they remembered his activities, working the power of Cupid disturbed their minds, and thus they could not speak. Wearing peacock feather ornament upon his head, blue karakara flowers on his ears, a yellow garment as brilliant as gold, and the Vaijayanti garland, Lord Krishna exhibited his transcendental form as the greatest of dancers as he entered the forest of Vrindavana. Beautifying it with the marks of his footprints, he filled the holes of his flute with the nectar of his lips, and the covered boys sang his glories. The gopis remembered all the transcendental qualities of Krishna mentioned in this verse. Krishna's artful way of dressing and the beautiful blue flowers placed over his ears excited the gopis' romantic desire. And as such, as he poured the nectar of his lips into his flute, they simply lost the inheritance. They simply lost themselves in ecstatic love for Krishna. O king, when young ladies in Vraja heard the sound of Krishna's flute, which captivates the minds of all living beings, they all embraced one another and began describing it. The word iti here indicates that after becoming speechless by remembering Krishna, the covered damsels then regained their kampusha and were thus able to ecstatically describe the sound of Krishna's flute. As a few gopis began to exclaim, and other gopis realized that they shared the same ecstatic love within their hearts. All of them started embracing one another, overwhelmed with conjugal love for young Krishna. The covered girl said, "Oh friends, those eyes that see the beautiful faces of the sons of Maharaja Nanda are certainly fortunate. As these two sons enter the forest, surrounded by their friends, driving cows before them, they hold their flutes to their mouths and glance lovingly upon the residents of Vrindavana. For those who have eyes, we think there is no greater object of vision. Dressed in a charming variety of garments upon which their garlands rest, and decorating themselves with the peacock feathers, lotuses, lilies, newly grown mango sprouts, and clusters of flower buds, Krishna and Balarama shine forth magnificently among the assembly of cowherd boys. They look just like the best of dancers appearing on a dramatic stage, and sometimes they sing. The gopis continue singing their ecstatic song as they remember the pastimes of Lord Krishna. The gopis wanted to go to the forest where Krishna was performing his pastimes, and while remaining concealed, peer through the leaves of the creepers and see the wonder of Krishna and Balarama dancing and singing with their boyfriends. This was their desire, but because they could not go, they sang this song in ecstatic love. So gopis are singing a song on Krishna. Gopyaha kima acharadaya kushalam sumenu damodaradara sudamapi gopikanam bhukte swayam yada vishishtara sammardunyo prusitto choshru mumasto sarava yataryaha. Text 9th has got 4 lines. Shloka. My dear gopis, that what auspicious activities must the flute have performed to enjoy the nectar of Krishna's lips independently and leave only a taste for us. Gopis for whom that nectar is actually meant. Gopis for whom the nectar is actually meant. The forefathers of the flute, the bamboo trees, and shed tears of pleasure. His mother, the river on whose bank the bamboo was born, feels jubilation. Therefore, her blooming lotus flowers are standing like a hair on her body. The translation is quoted from Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita. In the guise of releasing flowing up sap, the bamboo trees are actually crying tears of ecstasy. Upon seeing their child become an exalted devotee, flute of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Sanatana Goswami gives an alternative explanation. The trees are crying because they are unhappy at not being able to play with Krishna themselves. One may object that the trees in Vrindavana should not lament for what is impossible for them to obtain, just as a beggar certainly does not lament because he is forbidden to meet the king. But the trees are actually just like intelligent persons who suffer when they cannot obtain the goal of life. Thus, the trees are giving an example for the people and devotees who are crying because they cannot get the nectar of Krishna's lips. The sloka number 10. Vrindavanam sukhi bhavo vitinoti kirthim yoddeviki suta padambujala padamjalabdha lakshmi govinda venu manu mattamayura nrutyam prekshadrisanva paratman samastatvam. O friend, Vrindavana is spreading the glory of the earth, having obtained the treasure of lotus feet of Lord Krishna, the son of Devaki. The peacocks dance madly when they hear Govinda's flute. When other creatures see them from hilltops, they all become stunned. Here the Swami explains that because of activities such as those described in this verse do not occur in any other world, the earth is unequal. In fact, the earth's glories are being spread by wonderful Vrindavana because it is the place of Krishna's pastime. The name Devaki also refers to the mother Yashoda, as stated in the Brihad Vishnu Purana. The wife of Nanda had 2 names, Yashoda and also Devaki. Therefore, it was natural that the wife of Nanda developed friendship with Devaki, the wife of Vasudeva. Sirala Vasudeva, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains Krishna Leela as follows. In Vrindavana, the peacocks request Krishna, Govinda, please make us a dance. Thus Krishna plays his flute and they surround him in a circle and dance in time with the rhythm of his melody. And while standing in the midst of their dancing, he also sings and dances. Then those peacocks who are fully satisfied with his musical performance, out of gratitude, offer his pleasure their own divine feathers in the usual manner of musical performance. Krishna gladly accepts these presentations and places a feather upon the turban atop his head. Gentle animals such as deer, doves greatly relish the transcendental entertainment presented by Krishna, and to get good view, they flock to the peak of hills. Then, as they watch the breathtaking program, they become stunned in ecstasy. Ecstasy. Blessed are all those foolish deer, because they have approached Maharaja Nanda's son, who is gorgeously dressed and is playing on his flute. Indeed, both the doe and the ducks and bucks. Indeed, both the doe and the bucks worship the Lord with looks of love and affection. According to the Acharyas, the gopis were thinking as follows: the female deer can approach Krishna along with their husbands, because Krishna is the ultimate object of affection for the male deer also. Because of their affection for Krishna, they are encouraged by seeing their wives attracted to him, and thus consider their household lives become indeed. Indeed, they become joyful upon seeing how their wives are searching after Krishna, and following along, they urge their wives to go to the Lord. On the other hand, our husbands are jealous of Krishna, and because of their lack of devotion to him, they cannot even stand to smell his fragrance. Therefore, what is the use of our lives? Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women. Indeed, when the gods' wives flying on aeroplanes with their husbands catch sight of him and hear his resonant flute song, their hearts are shaken by Cupid, and they become so bewildered that the flowers fall out of their hair and their belts loosen. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada comments, this verse indicates that the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna extended to all the corners of the universe. Also, it is significant that the gopis knew about the different kinds of tune. In fact, even while sitting in the laps of the gods' husbands, the demigoddesses became agitated by hearing the sounds of Krishna's flute. Thus, the gopis thought that they themselves should not be blamed for their ecstatic conjugal attraction of Krishna, who, after all, was a cowherd boy from their own village, and thus the natural object of their love. If even goddesses became mad after Krishna, how could poor earthly cowherd girls from Krishna's own village avoid having their hearts completely conquered by his loving glances and the sounds of his flute? Using their unprized ears as vessels, the cows are drinking the nectar of this flute song flowing out of Krishna's mouth. The calves, their mouths full of milk from their mothers' moist nipples, stand still as they take Govinda within themselves through their tear-filled eyes and embrace him within their hearts. O mother, in this forest, all the birds have risen onto the beautiful branches of the trees to see Krishna. With closed eyes, they are simply listening in silence the sweet vibrations of his flute, and they are not attracted by any other sound. Surely these birds are on the same level as great sages. The birds resemble sages because they live in the forest, keep their eyes closed, observe the silence, and remain motionless. Significantly, it is stated here that even great scientists became maddened by the sound of Krishna's flutes, which is a completely spiritual vibration. When the rivers hear the flute song of Krishna, Their minds begin to desire him, and thus flow of their currents is broken and their waters are agitated, moving round in whirlpools. Then with the arms of their waves, the rivers embrace Murari's lotus feet, and holding on to them, present offerings of lotus flowers. Even such sacred bodies of water as the Yamuna and the Manasa Ganga are enchanted by the flute song, and thus they are disturbed by conjugal attraction of young Krishna. The gopis are implying that the sins, many different types of living beings are overwhelmed by conjugal love of Krishna. Why should the gopis be criticized for their intense desire to serve Krishna in the conjugal worship? In the company of Balarama and the covered boys, Lord Krishna is continually vibrating his flute as he herds all the animals of Vraja, even under the full heat of the summer sun. Seeing this, the cloud in the sky has expanded himself out of love. He is rising high and constructing out of his own body, with its multitude of flower like droplets of water, an umbrella for the sake of his friend. The Aborigine women of the Vrindavana area become disturbed by lust when they see the grass marked with a reddish kumkum powder, endowed with the color of the Krishna's lotus feet. This powder originally decorated the breast of his beloveds, and when the Aborigine women smear it on their faces and breasts, they feel fully satisfied and give up all their anxiety. Of all the devotees, this Govardhana hill is the best. Oh, my friends, this hill supplies Krishna and Balarama along with their cows and cowherd. This hill, the Govardhana hill, provides everything for the cows, calves, covered bunds, and all kinds of necessities. Water for drinking, very soft grass, calves, fruits, flowers, vegetables. In this way, the hill offers respect to the Lord. Being touched by the lotus feet of Krishna and Balarama, Govardhana hill appears very jubilant. My dear friends, as Krishna Balarama pass through the forest with their covered friends, leading their cows, they carry ropes to bind the cows near their legs at the time of milking. When Lord Krishna plays on his flute, the sweet music causes the flowing living entities to become stunned and the non-moving trees to tremble with ecstasy. These things are certainly very wonderful. Krishna and Balarama would sometimes wear their cowherding ropes on their heads and sometimes carry them on their shoulders. And thus they were beautifully decorated with all the equipment of covered boys. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura explains that the ropes of Krishna and Balarama are made of yellow cloth and have clusters of pearls at both ends. There were these ropes around their turbans, and the ropes thus became wonderful decorations. Thus narrating to one another the playful pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as he wandered about in Vrindavana forest, the gopis became fully absorbed in thoughts of him. In this regard, Srila Prabhupada comments, this is the perfect example of Krishna consciousness. To somehow or other remain always engrossed in the thoughts of Krishna. The vivid example is always present in the behavior of the gopis. Therefore, the Lord Chaitanya declared that no one can worship the Supreme Lord by any method that is better than the method of gopis. The gopis were not born in very high Brahmana or Kshatriya families. They were born in the families of Vaishyas and not in a big mercantile communities, but in the families of covered men. They were not very well educated, although they heard all sorts of knowledge from the Brahmanas, the authorities of Vedic knowledge. The gopis' only purpose was to remain always absorbed thoughts of Krishna. The thoughts of Krishna is important thoughts of Krishna is the only way the Bhakti Marga and Bhakti Yoga comes to you. All the devotees should be absorbed in thoughts of Krishna all the time, chant the names of Krishna all the time, chant the Krishna's devotional mantras all the time, or Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is the sacred mantra of Lord Krishna. On the other hand, you can chant Krishna's 24 names all the time. Om Keshvaya Namaha, Om Narayana Namaha, Om Madhvaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha, Om Vishnuvaya Namaha, Matsudaya Namaha, Trivikramaya Namaha, Vamanaya Namaha, Sridharaya Namaha, Hrishikeshaya Namaha, Padmanabhaya Namaha, Damodaraya Namaha, Sankarshnaya Namaha, Vasudevaya Namaha, Pradyumnaya Namaha, Aniruddhaya Namaha, Purushottamaya Namaha, Dokshaya Namaha, Narasimhaya Namaha, Achyutaya Namaha, Janardhanaya Namaha, Upendraya Namaha, Hare Namaha, Sri Krishna. These are the 24 letters. Thus, and the purports to the humble servants of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada of the 10th canto, 21st chapter is finished. And then tomorrow we are going to go to the 22nd chapter tomorrow. Hari Om Tat Sat. Om Namostu Anantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshirabha Sahasranamne Purushashtaya Sahasrakoti Udaranirima Akashat Paritam Metagit Sagaram Sarvadeva Namaskaraha Sri Keshvam Prigatyo Namaha Sarva Vedeshat Punyam Sarva Tirteshu Yatpalam Tatpalam Pushmaptu Vasanat Vasevasya Vastante Jagatrayam Sarva Bhuta Nivasosi Vasvimuste Kayena Vacha Manasendriyarva Buddhatmanava Prakate Smava Karomi Adyat Sagalam Parasmai Narayana Samarpayami. Hari Om Tat Sat.